they don't corrupt powerful people. They corrupt people and then give them power. They won't give you the power until you're corrupted. That's Hollywood, by the way. You don't get good parts unless you're corrupted. Fauci, I think, should be taken to The Hague and tried for crimes against humanity. I have no problem with that idea. There's a kind of a conflict going on here, and there's a vast number of people who are very bullish, and they're bullish because they're watching a sea change going on in Washington. Those are cadaver dining parties. But so she's a Satanist. I went to this dinner party. I'd be heading out the door as fast as my feet could move. The Pentagon supposedly has lost $14 trillion. Well, guess what? That pays for CBS, NBC, and ABC, and MSNBC, and Fox, and you name it. They need us to keep watching the news because they need us to keep shaping. And then, of course, you always need the limited hangout. You need the person who you think is on your team. These are declassified 40-year-old reports talking about the shit they could do to you from satellites. And somehow I think we're going to pay for this. I think that Ron Paul's, blowback theories, and we are going to pay for this.
Welcome to Discourse with Christian. I'm your host, Christian White, and today's guest is Dave Collum. Dave is an award-winning professor of organic chemistry at Cornell. He's a libertarian thinker, an unapologetic market contrarian, a staunch believer in the Austrian business cycle, and advocate for gold. Dave is a regular contributor to Zero Hedge and never shies away from calling out economic distortions. Since 2009, his Year in Review has been a must-read material for those who question mainstream narratives, known for his sharp takes on markets, politics, and global affairs. Dave, thanks so much for taking the time to be on the show today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's my honor, actually. Yeah.
Would love to start off asking you what's your current assessment of the global economy and financial markets?
Well, there's a kind of a conflict going on here, and there's a vast number of people who are very bullish, and they're bullish because they're watching a sea change going on in Washington. I must confess that at some point this drumbeat's going to get in my skull, but the problem I have is that we're at a place in the business cycle that just doesn't lend itself to being the beginning of a bull market and the beginning of an economic expansion. We're really at the place where we should be contracting and valuations should be heading south either precipitously or for a very long time. And so I just don't think you build economic booms off and market booms off of foundations like this. So I think I'm adamant. I market myself as the most bearish guy on Twitter and unapologetically believe that.
Could you share, as it relates to that, your thoughts on the past couple months, so to speak, with Trump's team having been in office and so on and so forth?
Well, I think they're doing all the right things. So I'm unhappy with some stuff. So I would say 95, 98% I'm happy with. Most generally, it's good to see that someone can get in that office, actually do something, and not just nibble around the edges. I like Trump's A team. Where I'm a little unhappy is places where they're falling short. The most recent one was, Pam Bondi, who I was never a fan of, but it was for a trivial reason. She one time came out during some hurricane season or something and said that we're going to round up the price gougers. And I'm a believer that price gouging is essentially a non-existent boogeyman, and that if you actually dig into it, you should not round up price gougers. And it's the wrong way to think about the problem. And so I didn't like that, but you can say, well, that's a pretty trivial thing to hold against a person. Maybe she's got stuff under the hood. The Epstein thing is bigger than some people are giving it credit. And that is that, she said, I've got the files on my desk. We all know names of people on Epstein's list, so it's not like this was going to tell us anything. And she said what that man did is really disgusting and this and that. And then what she released was garbage. And and she acts appalled that the Department of Justice didn't give her the good stuff, but she had them on her desk and she pretended like it was supposed to be the good stuff. So the backlash is what got her to turn on the FBI and say, you didn't give me the right stuff. She had a chance to look at those files, and so I'm not happy with that at all. I'm not happy with Trump promising to give Trump and Doge promising to give $5,000 to people, and they talk about going to give some amount to people and then use some of it to pay off the debt. And I go, well, right now the deficit's what, something like $1.7 trillion. You don't pay off a penny of debt until you've got the deficit down to zero. And you can pretend to pay off debt, but if you've got deficit, you're replacing that debt. So you're emptying water out of one side of the boat and pouring it in the other side of the boat. And so I think we have to find the money, get it back in earnest, cut the size of the government. I got in an argument yesterday, a discussion with a guy who kept talking about tax breaks and stuff. I said, you don't get to get tax breaks until you stop spending. The whole problem is spending. It's not that you're being asked to pay too many taxes. You're spending, right? If we weren't spending, we wouldn't have to pay taxes. And so focus on the spending. And that's where Doge has started out pretty good, but then you start to get the headline baloney that smacks of more smoke and mirrors than real flames. And so I'm a little worried about that. I'm worried he's going to lose momentum. That's just a concern. I'm thrilled at the idea of hiring a bunch of code heads who can now connect all the fraud and graft and grift and around the government and possibly root out all the fiascos that we've been living with. It is inadequate to stop that. I want to know who got that money. So there might be some LGBTQ organization in Afghanistan that got $2 million, right? So we know, I know. The only people who don't know are just complete morons. That's not the story, right? That's not who got the money. So if it's, for example, some black ops CIA group, I can live with that. We know they exist. It's not a shock. If it's some warlord in some faraway country, I can live with that too, because we know that we do that. And that's the cost of being a superpower, I guess. If it goes back to the DNC, like it did with, say, the FTX money laundering scam of Sam bankrupt fraud, I can't live with that as much. That to me is something that should cause the DNC to have to pay dearly for, and they didn't in that case. And if it's going back to individuals, I want to know who they are. I want to get it back from them, and I'd like to know who made the decision and who got the money and whether someone should be prosecuted. And so I think finding the money and stopping it is just step one. I need more than that now, I've decided.
And as it relates to that, do you feel, more or less that they're going to be able to achieve what they're setting out to achieve, whether it's Doge or whether it's, obviously they're not going to be able to do everything, but I guess to what extent do you see them being able to effectuate some of those changes that they're purporting to make, so to speak?
Well, it depends which person you're talking about. So to me, potentially the most important appointment was Patel, followed by Bongino. But again, this Epstein file release right away threw that on the rocks a little bit. Now, they haven't been in position long enough, but Bondi should have recognized that as a catastrophe. So I if we could clean up the FBI, that would be huge. I think Kennedy and Bhattacharya as a dynamic duo are precisely the people I would like to have overseeing the health and human services at NIH crowd. And I think that's in desperate need of serious overhaul. And so that I'm very happy about and have no reason to doubt, because Kennedy's been brawling with pharma. By the way, I should be pro-pharma. I consulted with Pfizer for 20 years. I collaborated with Big Cap Pharma many, many times and was on Merck's long-range steering committee, a 5-scientist panel. but at the level of clinical trials and stuff, I think they're doing some bad things. And I read the Pfizer papers. Pfizer knew full well what those vaccines were doing to people during the clinical trials. They were picking up on it, and it just didn't matter. So, is it about money? I don't think so. If you actually look at Pfizer, they didn't even make that much money. You got to track it because their share price didn't go anywhere. They paid out a couple of one-off dividends that looked a little big, and so you could actually do the math and say, okay, this is how much they actually pocketed during that burst of activity, maybe. But in the end, Pfizer's reputation went down the tubes. They paid a very dear price, and their share price is down to ridiculous, down to 1997 levels. And so it's hard to make the argument that somehow Pfizer got stinking rich from that vaccine. So what's it all about? I don't know. Is it about authoritarianism? Is it about just a bunch of egomaniacs who wanted to test the technology and they just couldn't resist? Right? Fauci et al. Fauci, I think, should be taken to The Hague and tried for crimes against humanity. I have no problem with that idea. It won't happen. I mean, we know that.
And how about as it relates to overseas, the conflict, of course, over in Ukraine? Of course, there's talks going on with Zelensky and such. Would love to hear your.
Yeah, those talks are not going well. So I think what we're doing, first and foremost, I'm clearly on record. So I've been paying attention to Ukraine ever so passively since 2014. And I've been sort of paying attention to Putin as a curiosity. And then we leading up to the Ukraine war, I started homing in a little bit harder on it. And then the war started. And I remember when it first started, I kept saying to my wife, and she kept saying I was nuts. I said, "This is not a war. I don't know what they're saying." And you'd see videotapes, and it would be you'd see newsreels where it would be there's a car on fire. There's a grandmother whining about something being not good. There's an explosion 30 miles away that you couldn't for the life of you tell you what the hell just blew up. Now contrast that with Baghdad day one, right? Where the whole city is just blowing to bits, right? So if Putin was really trying to fight a war against Ukraine, it was the most understated opening. So I suspect that Putin had sent in the force he sent in. Here's a stat for you: the force he sent in was 1/10 the size of the force that he sent to Finland, that the Soviets sent to Finland early in World War II and lost. So if you really think that was an occupational force, that's nuts. I think he went in there because NATO had been pushing on Russia through Ukraine. Putin had said unequivocally, repeatedly, nonstop for over a decade, you can't have Ukraine. He wasn't saying I want it. He's saying you can't have it. And everyone's trying to demonize Putin. I've decided Putin's the most grounded leader in the world. Call me a Putin apologist. I'm a Reagan Republican. I'm not a lefty who somehow is being duped by the communists. I might be getting duped, but it's not because I'm, sort of congenitally dupable by this story. And basically Putin had told us for a dozen years, look, you can't have Ukraine. He's saying you NATO. And so, John Mearsheimer and Steve Walt and Jeff Sachs, all these guys were saying, George Kennan, they all said, this is a disaster what you're doing here. Yet we kept doing it. And so I think the Ukraine war was completely and utterly under the control of NATO. They could have stopped it. It never had to start. And we wanted it. And so we have 500,000 dead Ukrainians because NATO wanted a proxy war. And we didn't get shit out of it, right? You'd be hard pressed to identify something we gained. We didn't wear down Russia. We didn't, the regime change argument, and I remember when Biden started talking regime change, and I go, now he's talking presidential. And I go, excuse me. When you start telling a superpower you're going to do regime change, those are fighting words. Reagan didn't do that to Gorbachev. He said, tear down the wall. He didn't say you got to get rid of Gorbachev. That's the fastest way to get nuked I can imagine, right? And so I blame the Ukraine war on NATO essentially 100%. There's obviously an error bar in that estimate. And I knew that when Trump got elected, he'd try to end the war. And I personally don't actually care where the borders are. Why do I care where the borders are? Why would I care? I mean, it's the borders in Europe are breathing constantly. Europe and that part of Asia, the borders have been moving since the dawn of civilization. Why do I care if some chunk of Ukraine is now back to Russia when they're ethnic Russians living there? So the catastrophe is we destroyed Ukraine and we killed Ukrainians. And it gave, we trafficked children out of Ukraine and stuff like that. So there's just a lot of offshoots, and it costs us a ton of money. And Zelensky, I don't think he's long for this world. I think his negotiations, he's fighting for his life. So
how do you see it, I guess, more or less kind of playing out?
Well, everyone has their needs. Zelensky wants to survive. That's very, very questionable. Putin's got a chunk of Ukraine that he wants absolute positive control over, and probably a crystal clear statement about what the rest of Ukraine won't be, and that is it won't be NATO. And Trump has said unequivocally it won't be NATO. And so Putin has the strongest hand, in my opinion, because Trump wants a fast win. So Putin, if I were Trump, I'd go to Putin and say, tell me what you want. If you're reasonable, we can wrap this up fast. And Putin will say, I want this chunk along the Northeast region. I want this amount of coastline. And I don't want the rest of Ukraine in NATO. I want a clear statement. And, the Brits can threaten to move troops into Ukraine. And I will be the first to say, I told you so, when they start arriving back in Britain in body bags. And all of a sudden, it's like, what were you thinking? Since when do you give a shit about Ukraine? I mean, it was considered the most corrupt country in the world. So we're going to end up in a situation that's far worse than we were before the war. We didn't get anything. Now, here's where Trump's going to win, though. So Trump wants fast. Putin wants geography and control. Zelensky wants to survive. That's the sketchiest. Europe can't get its shit together at all. Europe looks like a mess to me. And so I think what's going to happen is Trump's going to cut deals. This is my fantasy optimism. He's going to cut deals with Zelensky that gets resources. He's going to cut deals with Russia that's a win-win for Russia and the United States. We want their oil, we want their timber, we want their minerals, and they want to sell them. And so I think that everything will be better off, except for there's 1 million dead people now.
And I know you kind of touched on Europe a little bit, but if you care to share any light on perhaps, the Europeans and their, what may materialize sometime this year. I don't know if you have any commentary or thoughts on that.
Well, Europe is known to get unexpectedly into big brawls, right? So I would not want to predict where this all goes, but you've got democratically elected regimes that have been toppled by new regimes, right? So it's not the fall of democracy, it's the fall of regimes. And, I like, for example, Viktor Orban. I think Hungary's handled everything brilliantly. Viktor Orban's a hero status. Now, there's probably bad aspects to him, and I'm probably being naive about that. But when I listen to what he says, I go, he's spot on. I think the Brits are acting very badly. I think their view of civil rights now has totally gone down the toilet. So they're doing things that are just appalling. Germany's in this paradoxical situation where their economy is said to be in tatters. I can't say firsthand. I don't have the skills to analyze the German economy, but everyone I know says Germany's economy is a mess. They shut down all their power plants. How could it not be a mess? Yet the DAX is in an exponential blow off. And That's not going to end well, in my opinion. I think they're going to have a tough time. The DAX is somehow going to generate a lot of widows when that thing finally stops doing its goofy thing. So markets, I would say, in general, are emergent. They're not climbing the wall of worry, in my opinion. They're at, I'd say, record valuations, and that's never worked well. It's never ever worked. Being at record valuations may guarantee you some more short-term profits, but for the buy and hold crowd, which we're all told to do, right? No one tells us to trade. We're going to get hurt. We're going to lose a ton of money. Not me. Well, maybe me, but I don't own a lot of equities, so I'm not going to get hurt by that market.
For some of the viewers who aren't familiar with your background and such, would you say that would be kind of more of a all of a sudden everything, you know, shit hits the fan and sort of thing, like immediately, or if it's more of kind of a gradual?
No, gradual. The reason being is that the markets are so hardwired now for dip buying. We've been told to buy the dips ever since 1981. I've said this a number of times, and I feel like I should just play a videotape. But the markets, I have the markets at 200% over historical average valuation. You say, well, how do you get to that? Well, first of all, I have about 25 metrics that are all reasonably aligned on that point. But let's pick one just for laughs. And that's the CAPE, right? That's the Case-Shiller price earnings ratio. In 1981, it was 6. Historical CAPE. How do you do historical? Well, what I do to get a historical CAPE is I leave off the last 30 years because it's been insane. I take from 1880 to 1990, and the CAPE just wobbled in a channel, just getting too expensive, getting too cheap, back and forth, for 110 years. And it averaged about 12. It's now 38. So that's a 70% correction just to get back to the average. And by the way, a little arithmetic tells me it's probably got to spend a little time below the average, right? And so the question is, why did that happen? Well, in 1980, the markets were profoundly undervalued. Now, undervalued is a sketchy term, way below historical average value, way below. In part because inflation was looking awful. So who would want to own an equity when inflation's ravaging you, right? But it was about to subside. We didn't know it, but it was about to subside. So the PE ratio of the market was at 6. The boomers were hitting the workforce. They brought their wives with them for the first time. And so it was a phenomenal demographic push where we had a young, highly populated workforce. The Buffett's 99 article in Fortune talks about how the only thing that matters is the long-term direction of interest rates. So he says from 67 to 81, interest rates went up. And he said that's why the markets were so bad. They actually lost 70, 80% inflation adjusted from 67 to 81. The GDP grew fine. It wasn't about the economy. It was about the interest rates. He says from 81 to 99, rates went nothing but down. And he says the GDP was inferior during that stretch to the 67, 81. But because the rates were going down, the markets were going up. He says that's the whole ballgame. He also says if you ignore valuation, you add in, sort of typical GDP growth and stuff like that, and you account for fees and stuff, he said you can't get more than about 4% per year. And which shocks most people because they're used to getting 12. And so during the 81 to the present, interest rates went from like 17 to 0. They've now started the route back up. And if it's a secular change in the bond market, if the credit cycle has rolled over, then we're in for a lot of pain, according to Buffett, which is why he's in so much cash and not long-term cash. The demographics is now wrong, right? The boomers are retiring. They're old. They're going to be expensive. We're going to add their healthcare to GDP. But if you've got a 20-year-old Chevy Chevette and it's in the shop every 2 weeks, You're spending a fortune on it. That's not GDP. That's the cost of a depreciating asset. Well, the boomers are now a depreciating asset. And the fact that they're going to suck up healthcare just shows you how fast they're depreciating. So that's not, you're not creating wealth. And if you think you are, then say, well, what would happen? How better off would we be if the boomers had no health problems? And you say, well, we'd be much better off. So the fact we have to pump up the boomers to keep them walking is not the good news, right? So throughout all this, from 81 to the present, so the Russians, the Soviets were out of capital, so they sold us before they collapsed. They sold us all sorts of resources. China came out of the Middle Ages. They started selling us goods with a labor cost of what, 20 cents an hour, probably. And so we had these tailwinds that are almost unimaginable that they would ever return. These are humongous tailwinds. During that time, from 81 to the present, where valuations, which are the price of the markets relative to something they ought to track, which means that both the numerator and the denominator are inflation sensitive. So price to earnings, price can go up because of inflation, but earnings go up because of inflation. So it doesn't actually change the valuation. Price to revenue, price to you name it, price to book, they're both inflation, they're all inflation sensitive. So inflation doesn't get you out of an overvaluation bind. So now we're 200% over historical fair value, historical average value. And we got there by compounding the valuation, which really shouldn't trend, it should only wobble around. We compounded the valuations 4% a year for 40 years. We're not going to do that again. What I think we're going to do is we're going to compound the valuations negative 4% a year for 40 years. Now, based on where we're at valuation-wise, you say, well, let's say we just block and tackle our way out. You can pretend like Trump's going to produce a 10% growth in the GDP. I think you need to get a CAT scan if you do. Let's just assume the GDP acts like the 20th century, which, by the way, it grew around 2.2%, somewhere in there for the 20th century, which if we can repeat the 20th century, I'd say we did a pretty good job, right? That was a good century. Then to just, if the inflation adjusted market cap doesn't move, inflation adjusted, and we just kind of grow the GDP steadily, it's going to take us 45 years. And no, it's going to wait 45 years. So you say, well, then the market's going to crash. Well, we're hardwired to buy the dip, so that won't achieve anything. So to correct the markets, a correction, we haven't had a correction so long, it's ridiculous. I don't consider 0809 a correction. That's how bearish I am. In 0809, we reached historical average valuation and we sprung right back out of it again because of $30 trillion from central banks. A correction requires you correct the price back to some normal value, which is a 70% correction. And you also have to correct investors' attitudes. Everyone thinks we're going to make 12% a year. They need to be smacked repeatedly. So a big dip will just get bought. We'll achieve nothing. The way we're going to correct this is it's going to go down. And then investors are going to buy the dip. And then the market, it's going to climb back up. We're going to say, oh, it's fantastic. It's going to be 1930. And then the market's going to smack us down again. We go, okay, that hurt a little bit. That one smarted, right? Then the investors are going to jump in, and then the market's going to smack them down again. And it's going to smack them and smack them and smack them until you're finally at a bottom. And investors are going to say, I am never touching any of that crap again. And that'll be when the green shoots will very slowly start to appear. And I think that's going to take, I think the best model, and models are dangerous, but I think the best model is the Nikkei. The Nikkei took 15 years to find a bottom. I in a podcast once shouted out and said, can anyone tell me how long it took an investor? So a Nikkei investor who owned the top in 89 is still underwater. 35 years later, they're underwater, inflation adjusted. By the way, Buffett's analysis of 4% doesn't include taxes. Right? and you have to pay taxes. And so I just sold a violin for $28,000 that I bought for $16,000, but it was 20 years ago I bought it for my son. So it actually should have sold for more than 28,000, and I have to pay taxes on the gains. So I lost a lot of money. Now I don't mind. I mean, you buy a violin, that's what you expect. So in any event, I think the markets will get smacked down, and over time, you will adjust attitude. And Buffett also, he's always been sort of rah, go America, I buy American. He waves the flag all the time. He's a hoser, in my opinion, actually. But he started saying things like, look, in 1989, 14 of the 20 biggest companies in the world were Japanese. They're not now. And he says, you think, and he cited the number of America's world's biggest companies now. And he says, you think they're going to be the biggest companies in 20 or 30 years? No, they're not. Another way of phrasing it is, do you think the Mag 7 chapter, when there's a chapter that says Mag 7 is the title of the chapter, is that going to be a love story or a horror story? And I'm predicting it's going to be a horror story. It's going to be the Nifty 50. It's going to be the railroad trusts. It's going to be one of those stories that's remembered for what didn't work. And in 1933, if you would own the market in 1933, you're up 2 or 3-fold. Do you ever talk about how great it was in 1933, how much gains there were? No. Because everyone remembers going from 29 to 33. And the pain of that, it was just insufferable. And the damage done by that is insufferable. The guys who bought in 20 and held to 33, they made money. The guys who bought the Nikkei at 65 and held till now compounded about 3% a year, uninflation adjusted, no tax adjustment, things like that. So another favorite, by the way, I know I'm babbling. Buffett loves Coca-Cola, right? He drinks his cherry Coke. He does his, to me, the reason I dislike Buffett, he's like the mafia don who, to avoid the law, walked around the street in a bathrobe, pretending to be insane, harmless. And he just says, oh, I just like to buy companies like Dairy Queen and, Coca-Cola. And he forgets to mention that he breaks all sorts of laws at the bottoms when he cuts all sorts of inside deals and does all sorts of derivatives trading. And the guy's a stock jobber. But that's not the image he wants. So Buffett, after the 2000 to 2003 problem, actually lamented owning Coke. And you go, oh, I don't remember that part. Well, yeah, because he quickly forgot that. But here's the problem. Coke in 1998 hit a PE of 50. I've been obsessing over this Coke story. PE of 50. Now, Coca-Cola is a stodgy old company. It's huge. They own the whole beverage market, for Christ's sake, right? It is not imaginable to view Coca-Cola really as anything more than just a royalty trust, like an oil company royalty trust, where they just print money to pay dividends to their shareholders. The idea from 1998 of them doubling earnings, what would you have to do? How many Indonesians are not buying Coke, right? How many people out there were not buying Coca-Cola in 1998? There just aren't that many. So I don't think Coke could organically double its earnings, inflation adjusted. But let's pretend like they do. So in 1950, Coke was priced to return a cash flow of 2%. Treasuries were priced to return, 10-year treasuries were priced to return 6%. Why would you own Coke? There's no reason to own Coke. It's not NVIDIA, which I wouldn't own either, but and then if you imagine they double their earnings organically, not through acquisition because that costs money. So let's say they buy Pepsi. Okay, so what? You have to pay for the company. So that doesn't get you anywhere unless you pay cheaply. So let's say they double their earnings. They would then be priced to earn 4%. So Coke was not good, and Coke had a bad couple of decades. And Buffett realized, I shouldn't have held it. That was nuts. I knew better. Now, let's go to the more present. Apple. Everyone loves Apple. Oh, they've made gazillionaires. In the last 10 years, Apple's, I think it's their revenues have grown 50%. Their share price is up tenfold. 1.5-fold increase in revenues, tenfold increase in price. How's that going to work? It's not. There is going to be and by the way, the guy who came up with all the good ideas, he's dead. He's gone. And when was the last time Apple came up with a real good idea? Right? So let's go to Microsoft. Microsoft's earnings revenues are up 150%. But their share price has also gone up tenfold. So Microsoft could correct 75% just to undo the growth in their valuation from 10 years ago. And you go, well, that's ancient times, right? That's 2000, that's 2015, right? 2012. Hey, that's not exactly antiquity. And I remember looking at Microsoft thinking, they're now priced like a rational company. I don't remember thinking, holy shit, this is Philip Morris. I should buy this because it's got a PE of 5. But they looked well priced to me. And maybe they've done better than I expected in terms of growth. And then let's go to NVIDIA for fun, just for fun. I've written about NVIDIA off and on for years. They have a history of being crooks. Let's start with that. They have a history of real scammeroo. NVIDIA's revenues are up 25-fold in 10 years. That same 10 years. And you go, well, that's impressive. That's a growth company, right? And you go, okay, let's not worry too much about what Jack Gambles has been following, where he's been noting that they're vendor financing. There's at least 35 companies who've been buying NVIDIA chips without having a reason to buy NVIDIA chips, using money lent to them by NVIDIA. So that's what Global Crossing did in various companies that burned in hell at the end of the dot-com bust. And then you've got this AI push, which some of the companies will never make a penny and therefore they will stop being customers. The big guys will not stop being customers, but I heard rumors of a chip coming out of China that was much better. I might have been confused, but what seems to be sort of unequivocal is this deep six. Bill Fleckenstein calls it deep six. The China is coming up with innovations that could make NVIDIA look pretty bad. Now, during that period of 25-fold growth in revenues, their shares increased 250-fold. So a 90% correction brings those shares back into alignment. And you could say, well, NVIDIA, it's a growth company. I go, so what are they worth? $3 trillion? How many doublings can that withstand before it prices outside the known universe, right? So I just think this whole chapter is going to be ridiculous. And it's going to be one of these things like the housing bust where we go, we really should have thought about that, 125% mortgages and all those squares and cubes and mortgage-backed securities and super leverage. And there were thousands of people who saw that bust coming. Nouriel Roubini gets the most credit. They always introduce people as this is the guy who saw the real estate bust coming. I go, there were so many of us watching. I wrote about it in 2002 to give you an idea how early. Josh Rosner was writing about it in 99. So people will have seen it coming. And then when it finally comes, the guys who saw it coming, no one's going to want to hear from them. They're not going to get credit because it's going to be, screw you, get out of my face. I don't want to hear from you. So you're not a hero. John Hussman will end up being right. Jesse Felder, there's some bears out there. There's some guys who really, really understand how far over our skis we've gotten. But when it finally comes time where those guys should get a hat tip, they're not going to get it because everyone's going to be worried about the fact that their tail section's on fire. They'll look like a Toronto air crash. You're a very patient man listening to me rant.
I try to be. I was going to
Well,
answer
a
that
good
question.
podcast host does that. People say I should do a podcast. I go, no, no, I don't have the patience.
Well, that's funny. That's something that I remember watching a podcast before I started mine, and I remember seeing people in the comments are like, "Let the guy talk, let the guy talk." This is directed at another person. I thought, you know what, I don't want to be that guy. So I want, and what's funny is it's carried over into my conversations outside of podcasting, where I try and let the other person completely finish, kind of get something out of their system, and then so it's actually helped me in other ways.
Yeah, I don't have that patience. I step on people's sentences. So someone said put a pad of paper next to you so that you can write down a thought and don't feel so anxious to get it out. Um, but you got to be careful the comment section of your podcast. What I've noticed is I do podcasts with guys who are as good as you at patiently waiting. And then I'll look at the comment section and like Mike Ferris is very good. And there'll be comments that say, Mike, quit interrupting. And I go, what are you talking about? I believe those are bots, and I don't know what their purpose is, but I believe they are there to cause trouble. I've noticed I read comment sections because I want to find out what I screwed up. Sometimes people offer me useful information. And what will happen is there'll be these various statements that look totally organic to me, and then all of a sudden there'll be like 5 criticisms in a row that are just hostile. And then it goes back to normal. So some AI algorithm picked up something I said that said, okay, carpet bomb them for a bit, and then goes back to normal. And so you will get criticized for interrupting even if you don't say anything. That's what I've known. I did a podcast with someone where I had to kind of pseudo host, and I listened to the game tape very carefully. And boy, did they hammer me. And it might be because I'm just not as good as normal podcasters, but they just hammered me. And I had my brother watch and said, don't look at the comments, watch the podcast and give me suggestions. And he didn't pick up on it. I said, well, that's funny you didn't mention this because if you read the comments, I just got hammered.
Well, I guess that's just part of the nature of the beast, so to speak. And wanted to segue. I wanted to segue as it relates to the Middle East. If you had any comments that you wanted to make pertaining to that.
Yeah, no one understands it. Let's start with that. I one time wrote that. I said, after 9/11, I read about, I don't know, 10, I don't know how many. It's a blur. Books on the Middle East to understand 9/11. I said, oh, shit, now I got to get serious. And no matter how many I read, I didn't understand it. In part, I think if you're reading on a subject that's completely foreign to you, it just doesn't stick. There's no stickiness. So, for example, if I read about medieval history in Europe, I have kind of a framework to work with. So I did some serious diving on medieval history in Europe. And it took me a while to really get the framework solid, but at least I knew names like Charlemagne and things like that, and so it wasn't totally unintelligible. But the Middle East, I've just I've listened to Scott Horton talk about it, and Scott Horton really is very encyclopedic. Here was a funny story. I watched the Scott Horton podcast on something fairly recently. And I said, oh, I got to listen to some more Scott Horton again. And so I searched Scott Horton podcasts and I found one that I did with him. I go, oh, I forgot about that. I think he interviewed me when I challenged the British for lying about the Skripal poisonings. I think that's when he interviewed me. So I don't understand the Middle East. I've got I'd say gag order light on Israel, Gaza. My general belief about the Middle East is the United States foreign policy is don't let anyone get strong, and if someone starts, you just beat them down, period. And it's a savage way to run the world. There may be a reason why that's a smart thing to do, but there's just a lot. You want to talk about the Holocaust? Since September 11th, we've killed something like 5 million Middle Easterners. Why is that not a Holocaust, right? bunch of crazies in planes hit the towers, if you actually believe the story. And if some Americans did that, I would not want to get bombed for the next 20 years because a couple of Americans somehow whacked out and did that. It's not my country that did that. These are complicated narratives. And so I think our Middle Eastern policy is awful. You know, Gaddafi had kind of gotten control of Libya, and all of a sudden, boom, down he goes. And you know, Saddam. So when I read the first book I read about the Middle East was one of the first ones was Secretary of the Treasury O'Neill's book when he left the Bush White House. I said, I got to read this book because I got to find out what was going on inside that place, right? And he said that their first cabinet meeting, they were talking about going to war with Iraq. Their very first cabinet meeting before 9/11. He said, I could not understand what we were doing. And then the guy named Richard Clarke, who was also way up in the chain somewhere, wrote a book about it. And he basically concluded that the enemy is within. He sort of, with winks and nods, claimed that, and he's pretty critical of the U.S. administrations and all the things they've done wrong. And so I was formulating this opinion that we're not walking softly and carrying a big stick. We're walking around, stomping around and smacking people with a big stick. And somehow I think we're going to pay for this. I think that Ron Paul's, blowback our theories, and we are going to pay for this. And I think we're now that we're in a world with drones and things like that, they can hurt us real fast if they decide to. And so, and you keep hearing how we're going to go after Iran, and I go, why? And you'll hear stories about them having nuclear weapons and stuff like that. And I go, well, that's an argument against going after them. But I also remember all the propaganda about how bad Putin was and what was going on in Ukraine. I go, they're lying about that. I can't tell you an official narrative that isn't a lie at this point. They all seem like lies to me. And so, October 7th was a problematic day. What I'm confident is that the narrative we've gotten about what happened in Israel that day, I guarantee you they're lying. I don't know what happened, what didn't, but I guarantee you no government will take a story like that and not embellish it to optimize its impact, right? That's just criticizing government. And what I can say, there's something fishy about it, right? If you'd asked me before October 7th, you said Hamas is going to drop 800 guys into Israel. How long will it take for Israel to deal with that problem? I would have said, 10, 15 minutes. And they romped around supposedly for like 8 hours, doing all sorts of things. And I'm going, I don't think so. There's something wrong with that story. So I am unqualified to know what we should be doing with Israel and Gaza. I just don't have any idea what's in America's best interest. What I feel very strongly about is whatever we do should be in America's best interest. And I'm unconvinced that that's true. I don't know. I just don't know. But the political cross currents are so strong. And so if some guy wants to reach out to me and say you're anti-Semitic, I'm just going to say, screw you. I'm not. I'm criticizing government. And I just don't know. It could be we should defend Israel at any cost. That might be our best move. I just don't know. But I don't trust Netanyahu. Even his own countrymen hate him. I mean, he's not a popular guy. So, but that's about as much as I say about Israel Gaza. I don't technically take sides and say they shouldn't be bombing the Gaza Strip. They should be. I just don't understand it at all.
Yeah, I was going to mention, I feel like as time goes on more and more, and how, of course, media, like, we're shooting a podcast here, I'm in California, you're back east, how everything's become decentralized.
What city? Where are you in California? Where are you in California?
I'm in Clovis, California currently, so right
Okay.
in the middle of the state.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
and about an hour from Yosemite. And what was I going to mention is it's just amazing. I feel like as time goes on, how much I don't know, and I feel like the average person how much they don't know and what they've been fed and consumed. And I'll just comment real quick as I did with another guest earlier this week, which was I come from a military family. My dad, I was in the Navy. My dad was in the Navy. His dad was in the Navy. His dad was in the Marine Corps, so on and so forth. And kind of a pro-military family. Not like over the top pro-military per se, but as time has gone on, I've become more and more critical of things that they've done. Obviously, before my time, I was too young to have any commentary on Iraq and Afghanistan and such. But as I mentioned, for the audience who've listened to other episodes, Smedley Butler's book, and his commentary on
I
the
read
banana
it.
wars and such,
Yep.
really, yeah, just changed how I looked at things. And whether it's listen to some of the people on Sean Ryan's show with CIA stuff and stuff, it's like, what is really going on here? Like, I don't even know what to believe anymore.
Well, Sean Ryan, it's a complicated story. And it's complicated because there's Sean Ryan and then there's his guests. And I think his guests I have no reason to doubt Sean Ryan, but I do often distrust his guests. And so I don't want to be critical of Sean at all. But I think there's times like there was this chick there who was which is great. Now that Trump's elected, we can say chick again. A chick who was CIA, right? You remember that? You remember that podcast? There was a woman who was CIA, and I just said she's lying her ass off to us. She might have been telling partial truth. She could be 80% truthful, but boy, that 20% can really create chaos. I did a podcast probably 3 days ago with Bitcoin veterans for Bitcoin or Bitcoin veterans with a guy named Shane T. Hazel and a couple others, and that was a fun one because they were. I don't know where I get the feeling maybe they were special ops guys or something. So it's pretty unfiltered. It was pretty rowdy. And they're pretty anti-war too. So I think someone who's seen war up close, which I have not, is going, look, you don't do this without a good goddamn reason. Right? You see one of your buddies get his head blown off. That makes you think twice about proxy wars and things like that, right? And there's things in this country that once in a while something bad happens, maybe something I have to deal with or whatever. And I go, I could live in Palisades, could have my house burned down. I could be in the Gaza Strip. I could be in Ukraine. Get some perspective, dude. But I don't think we should be raining terror down on Ukrainians. I don't think I think we did, and we killed too many people, in my opinion, way too many.
Yeah, it's I guess in short just a travesty that even as a
I've got a couple names for you guys. I'd love to see you interview. Lee Slusher. Lee Slusher on Twitter. I can give it to you afterwards, but I got him Lee Slusher on Twitter. He's like 4 tours of duty intelligence. Got him Tony Schaffer on Twitter. He's a very prominent spook. It's under the name T_S_spooky. And I was on a Zoom call with him, and he's either very prominent or fake. And I was fact checking him, and the guy was real, unambiguously real, and very, very outspoken. Another guy who's very quietly out there on Twitter named Stephen Coughlin. And he was the GOAT for the Pentagon on radical Islam. So he's the guy who knew the most about radical Islam. And he went to the Pentagon and said, we got to learn more about radical Islam if you guys want to figure out what's going on here. And they basically blew him off. And I was on a Zoom call with him, and he said some shit that was just so wise that I made sure I maintain a connection with him. And at one point, a woman, I did a revisionist history of World War II last year. What audacity. I literally wrote 20 pages of why the World War II narrative's all wrong. Kind of a Daryl Cooper light presentation. And in one of the books, they mentioned Stephen Coughlin. And the book was so different than what I expected. I reached out to Stephen and said, Stephen, do you know this was a book by Diana West called American Betrayal? And she really writes a very different history of World War II. And I said, do you know Diana? And is her book American Betrayal credible? And he said, oh, she's fantastic. And I really trust Stephen. And he said, and she had to go into hiding because the neocons, they went after her hard. And then in one of her books, she's talking about, or was it? So I did a podcast with her, and she talked, and I mentioned the archives when the Soviet Union collapsed, and I knew this had to be true, but I said the archives really didn't get open, did they? And she said, no, that's a fantasy. And it's because I realized that, first of all, they're probably a billion pages, right? I mean, these Soviet archives had to fill Shea Stadium, and the Soviet leaders were still alive, so they didn't want them opened up, right? They weren't looking to all the shit they did to their own citizens and you name it, right? And then the Americans, that was the focus of the archive, so they didn't want them opened up. So who's going to open them? So a guy named Bukovsky gets in there in the early 90s, mid 90s with a hand scanner that was very special tech. I think it's operationally the equivalent of an iPhone at this point, but and he got in there, got some information. And then I ran into a review of Diana's book by Bukovsky, and he talked about how great her book was. I said, okay, that circle just closed, right? So in any event, the history of war is almost impossible to read. So I read a book this year on the War of 1812. Because I realized that the only thing I knew about the War of 1812 was the date. and I knew that there were ships on Lake Champlain, and I'm going, I don't know anything. Why did we have it? And it turns out the opening couple of paragraphs says it's the most obscure war in American history. And people are still arguing why it occurred. And it turns out it was like this bar fight. It just the Brits were causing trouble on the high seas, and we were kind of causing trouble back. And the Brits really didn't want a war, but the Americans got pissed off and finally said, screw it, we're going to war. And the Brits got, oh, shit, we got Napoleon to deal with. We don't need this crap, right? But I think it served the purpose of letting the Brits know once and for all, we were not a colony. I think it was kind of, we had to remind them we're not a colony. And but we were fighting Canada. And at the end, they said, look, the Americans pretended they won. The Brits were happy to just forget about it. They didn't want anything to do with it. And the Canadians were lucky that they didn't get taken over by the Americans. And so that's how the war ended. And so, but the history of wars is very hard to do because everyone's lying. Everyone's lying.
You know, I was going to comment on how I think it's fascinating how you look at the Americas and how vastly different it is, whether, you know, English speaking countries settling in, you know, what is the continental U.S., and then also a little bit, you know, obviously up in Canada, but also the French being up there, and then Spanish and Portuguese in Latin America, and how vastly different it is in the economies. And I know it was Victor Davis Hanson or another person just commented on how, you know, some of these countries have all the resources, everything they need, but they're mired in the kind of the culture and cultural and the caste, you know, nature that has continued to permeate society. It's just interesting how vastly different you know, where we, you know, several hundred, you know, a few hundred years later since you know, people started colonizing the Americas.
Well, so it's Hanson's book. I can't remember the title now, but it was about 4 collapsing empires. Hanson's very smart. There's guys who don't like him because they view him as, they call him a Straussian conservative or something. And it's like, whatever. He seems smart to me. resource-rich countries usually suck, right? If you actually look at where the real power structure is, it's often in non-resource rich. We are the exception. If you are a banana republican, you have resources, you are about to get raped and pillaged. And so your worst nightmare is to discover oil underneath your ground. That's when often the Americans show up and the Chinese show up, and you go, I wish we had discovered water instead.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating with that. Wanted to ask you a couple other questions. First one being, what as it relates to how you go about procuring information, what sources do you or could you share with the audience that you look to each day or weekly to acquire information?
I get a lot of stuff fed at me email, so it depends on which kind of information. I'm probably doing a lot of confirmation bias on markets. I gave you my case for why I think we're in trouble. Once you formulated the case I just presented, that's not going to easily unwind itself, right? I'm not also going to wake up and say, I was wrong. We're going to have a great bull market, right? That you've really kind of anchored at that point. So I'm either right or wrong, and I'm going down with the ship on that one. Geopolitics, it depends on if it's interesting, and it depends on if I pick up on a thread that's not being told. And the greatest analogy, I used to read a lot of Michael Lewis books. And Michael Lewis had this knack for getting on a story and then finding the plot underneath the plot. And like, for example, The Blind Side was about, Michael, the NFL player. And he was a left guard. And he protects the quarterback. And so Lewis was interested in why they were paid so much. And then he discovered this Michael, God damn it, what's his name? Who supposedly been adopted by a Southern plantation family.
Michael
and
O'Hare? Am I saying that wrong? O'Hare?
I don't know. Michael Lewis, Blind Side. And it's about where the hell is the guy's name? Come on, give me his goddamn name. Oh, this is just really ridiculous. It's not giving me the name of the guy for Michael.
Well, on my end, I've got
O'Hare.
O-H-E-R. Yeah.
Yeah, Michael Orr. I think is that spelled right? That looks like it's spelled wrong. I would have said O-H-R-E. In any event, by the way, that's gotten contentious too. Michael Orr came out and said this is bullshit. They lied. Well, everyone else spells it that way too. Michael Orr. And Lewis finds these. So I wrote a blog about Buffett being a bullshit artist. And then I ran across a Michael Lewis blog from probably 15 years earlier that made exactly the same claim. And so I when I wrote mine, I modified it and said I've been scooped by 15 years. But I wrote a sort of a complimentary piece on it. It was under a pseudonym. It was back when I occasionally wrote stuff, but I didn't publish under my name because I wasn't sure I was ready to expose myself to that level of ridicule. So Bob Moriarty of 321 Gold, the gold bug, famous grizzled old bastard gold bug, I would send him shit and he would publish it under the name Thomas, which is my son's name. So I was Thomas on chat boards and things like that. I went by the name Thomas. And so once in a while I'll see a chat board talk about, oh, that's Thomas from the olden days, that sort of thing. So sources, I find Zero Hedge is great. You got to bring a big filter, right? There's a lot of crap, but if there's some big event occurring, Zero Hedge does a real nice job of pulling together the videos and things like that. And they often get on the correct side of an issue way ahead of everyone else. I know that the mainstream media is watching Zero Hedge carefully. Their readership is, I think they got a bigger viewership than CBS at this point, for example. And I think a lot of people are using it to spread information anonymously. And so if you want to write about, if you want to write about, you think someone's committing some criminal behavior and cooking their book, some company, you're a hedge fund manager, you might write a Zero Hedge article. I'm not sure how that works, but I went to search my name across Zero Hedge, and I think I got 65 hits. So I've been in there myself a few times now. And so I know that there's some bullshit in there. No, so I like that. I read Jesse Felder's stuff religiously. I read, it just runs across my field of view. Twitter is very good because I have enough followers, and often people tag me. And they know what I'm paying attention to, and all of a sudden there'll be something they'll say, "Oh, Dave," and they'll tag me and then paste the article. And so I've got scouts out there, and they know that I see it, and so they're happy to do it. So I think they realize that they're, and if you're a small footprint person, I did a tweet one day. This tells you something. I did a tweet one day. It was late at night. And often at night I'm just tweeting. I just have a thought. Why not, right? So I spit it out there. And one night I did a tweet. I said, I wasn't happy with J.D. Vance on the ticket. I said, by the time the election came, I realized I was wrong. And this was about a month after the election, after the inauguration. I said, now I realize I was profoundly wrong, right? So I was just thinking out loud. And I got 78,000 likes. And what that is about is that there's an awful lot of people who don't have a voice, but all of a sudden, somehow that statement caught their attention. I said, that's exactly what I've been thinking, right? And they wanted me to acknowledge. So one time I was chatting with this woman named Jessica Vaughn, I think it is, and she's like a supermodel and has 1 million followers, but she's smart. Her bikini shots should not undermine her intellectual firepower. And although they're distracting, and we were chatting, and she made some reference to why you'd like a tweet, and I said, well, also it's a way of saying to someone that somebody heard you. So you're out there tweeting into the void, and by hitting like, they go, oh, someone heard me. There's an awful lot of people out there in the world who want to be heard. And if they can't be heard directly, they want to hear someone say what they've been thinking. And so there's a kind of a desperation on the part of the masses to be heard, either via proxy or directly. And so that's what social media is. That's what the social part is. And so in any event, a lot of podcasts. So you lay it on the line and someone says, by the way, Dave, I think you're wrong on this. So you learn from that. I like three-way podcasts. I'm going to do one next week with Michael Ferris and Jim Kunstler, which is that's a nice threesome for me. Foursomes get a little big.
Love it.
And if there's someone I want to talk to, I get one of my podcast buddies to invite him and invite me.
Love it. Yeah, it's just amazing again how people can, anyone today can have a voice, and whether they're, I mean, it's just crazy. I feel like things have changed so much the past 10 years, and the technology.
And if you have good ideas, you will get legs, right? So there's people out there. There's a guy who's out there chasing the real dark shit named Ian Carroll. Now, for all I know, he's a spook who works for Mossad or something, right? Heaven only knows. But he presents himself as just a guy who's clearly very smart. who just digs into shit. And he have Ian Carroll, and he digs into dark shit and finds important stuff. And he's having an effect. He's having an effect. One day, Juanita Broderick showed up on Twitter, one of Bill Clinton's rape victims. We have people who still like Bill Clinton. I go, are you not aware that he's raped many women? Right? I mean, maybe this is not true. Maybe he's a victim of rumor mill, but there's an awful lot of women who've stuck to their story. And if you watch the Clinton Chronicles from back when he was in Arkansas, he was up to the same old crap back in Arkansas. So Juanita shows up on Twitter and tweets, it's under the name Atzenhut for some reason. I don't know where that came from. She tweets, Bill, you raped me. Hillary, you tried to destroy me. This was back in 2019. So a bunch of people chimed in and said, oh, that's not her. That's bullshit. Some guy says, I made some phone calls. That's her. So I said to Juanita, Juanita, you could pin that tweet. You could pin a tweet. And she says, well, I don't know how to pin a tweet. So I taught her how to pin a tweet. I've got screen grabs of this. I saved this one, right? And I taught her how to pin a tweet. And she twinned that tweet. And boy, did that go viral. And I go, that's how you help win an election right there, right? That was the 2016 election. And then that's when Trump invited 4 of Bill's rape victims for a press conference before the debate. Oh my God, what a Trumpian move, right? And the guys who were close to Trump said he didn't even have a plan. He just got him there and said, we're going to figure out something to do with these 4. And so there they are, sitting there in the debate as his guests. And Bill Clinton couldn't have looked madder. He could not have looked madder. And he deserves it, right? I mean, if you had to bet your life, has he done really bad stuff, you would have to make that bet. Probably rather comfortably. So, but somehow he hasn't been brought to justice. Because guys like that don't get brought to justice. Guys like that don't. So the Epstein story, I think we know about Epstein, but when they came out and said we're going to drop it, and then they dropped a bunch of garbage, that was a fundamental mistake on the part of Team Trump. People are mad about that. And if they drop the real stuff, there's tons of it. I mean, there's thousands and thousands of pages from many, many trials. That would blow circuits, is my guess. That would destroy a lot of careers. So we're probably not going to get it, right?
Yeah, I would say so. And I was gonna also ask, along the lines of kind of the Epstein stuff and will we ever know and who knows and such, is there anything else that you'd like to bring to light that you feel hasn't received the respect that it's needed or otherwise?
Yeah, yes. It's now a popular thing to mention, but it gets mentioned in the most casual way in which the person saying it doesn't put 2 and 2 together and say, wait a minute. And that is the child trafficking. So I've been sort of tracking that story for a while. And then Sound of Freedom came out, and that, of course, got legs. Now, here's the story of the trafficking. The metrics are terrible. So basically, if it depends who you ask, whether you ask the CIA or the FBI or various international agencies for missing and abused children or you name it. But there's anywhere from like 1 to 10 million kids a year getting trafficked. Now, what I can tell you is you don't traffic a kid halfway around the globe and then sell them for $50. So these kids have a market price. A guy named Ted Gunderson back in 1990, former head of the FBI Dallas wing, former head of the FBI Los Angeles wing, and a shortlister for the whole FBI, all of a sudden turned against the organization and started telling horror stories. And there's a 25-hour montage of his talks. And he said that a blonde-haired, blue-eyed kid, this is back in 1990, will bring $50,000. My Zoom call with Tony Schaffer, the spook, who I unambiguously know to be a legit spook. I asked him about trafficking at the end of his Zoom talk, and he starts talking about Epstein. I go, no, Epstein's interesting, but I think we all kind of know what was happening. I mean, there's probably some shocking stuff we don't know, but I think we have kind of a thumbnail sketch that it was an intelligence honey trap, you name it. And the names are probably unimaginably long list of names and people that really don't want to be named and things like that. But I said, no, I'm interested in the darker stuff, real dark stuff. I said, let me ask you a simple question. And I knew the answer, but I wanted to see what he said. And I said, does the Clinton Foundation traffic children? He said, oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, I had dinner with Matt Taibbi one night, and I told him that story. And you can see him roll his eyes as I asked the question rhetorically. And then I said, and I gave him Schaffer's answer, and he kind of popped forward. I said, yeah. No, the Clinton Foundation has been trafficking children the whole way. And it's above the fold news stories. Look up Laura Silsby. She's a Clinton Foundation staffer, got thrown in a Haitian prison several times for trafficking kids. They had to get bailed out by the Clintons. And there's trafficking all over the world. It's called harvest season. One of the most profoundly problematic areas turns out to be Eastern Europe. And where would you find a bunch of blonde-haired, blue-eyed kids who happen to be easily trafficked? The answer is Ukraine. So they're scooping up the kids from Ukraine. Now, 1 to 10 million kids. And you hear, how many times do you hear mention the southern border, right? They talk about, 500,000 kids made it across that southern border that looked like they were being trafficked. Where do they go? Can you name one? Now, they're not going to trailer parks. Can you name one person of wealth and power who's been convicted of receiving these kids? Where's the consumer? You can see imagery like in Sound of Freedom of some gnarly bastard from South America who's a trafficker, but that undermines the real question. Who are the consumers? And it gets really complicated because I don't even believe there's enough consumers to explain 1 million kids using traditional consumers. Are there really that many pedophiles? And the answer is only if the kids are not surviving. And it turns out there is pretty good information out there that says these kids are getting trafficked and killed. And then you ask the question, who? And like I posted a tweet the other day that I picked up from someone else. It's a picture of Keir Starmer as a kid sitting with a guy named Jimmy Savile. Now, Jimmy Savile is the most famous pedophile in history, probably. He was a pedophile of the stars. He was tight with the royal family, but he was considered a pedophile of enormous importance. Now, I believe that Europe suffers badly from all sorts of pedophile networks all throughout the bloodlines and the lineage and stuff like that. But there's Jimmy Savile with Keir Starmer. You go, what does that mean? Well, I've also got a videotape of Boris Johnson bitching at Starmer saying, and you're the guy who refused to prosecute Jimmy Savile. Right? And I'm going, this plot's thickening fast. And then I've got goofy stuff like a Jay Leno interview of JFK Jr. And Leno, they intended to go there. So Leno talks about JFK Jr.'s, magazine George, which he started. And he brings up a poem, and JFK Jr. kind of rocks back, and he says, "Oh God," he says, "I knew we were going to go there." And then he says, "I'm going to go to hell for reading this poem." And he reads the poem of a 9-year-old girl. And anyone who's followed this trafficking story within 2 lines of the poem would say, that girl's trafficked, period. I've read enough interviews of trafficked people who got out of the network, and it took one or two lines in the poem. I said, that girl's been trafficked. She starts out, she says, I'm a very yummy 9-year-old girl. She says, yummy in a weird sort of way. And I'm going, oh dear, right? And then she starts talking about this big round piece of dough with all the toppings on it, which gets straight to the Pizzagate story, the whole pedophile story. And I'm going, this girl's been trafficked. This poem was written by Monica Lewinsky.
Wow.
Wow, right? And then you say, well, what do you do with that? And you say, well, first and foremost, it tells you that Monica's role in the White House, all the cigars and shit, was not just some starstruck groupie. It's a totally different story. And Keir Starmer sitting there with Jimmy Savile tells you that, and there's Jimmy Savile, by the way, with King Charles when he was younger, and I mean Jimmy Savile got knighted. And there's a real problem in Belgium. Belgium has a really elaborate pedophile network in Belgium. Now, what they don't do is they don't pull the kids right off the street. And I watched an 2-hour interview of a guy whose face was covered and his voice was muffled. And I listened very carefully to stuff that I say that's bullshit. And he sounded credible to me. I thought he was answering honestly where I thought I would be able to detect dishonesty. He said, we don't just grab kids like off the street of the United States or someplace like that. That causes so much trouble. It's not worth it. He said, we can go to some godforsaken place and grab kids trivially. So we're not the ones grabbing the kids off in Sheboygan, Michigan. Now, they are, I think, grabbing kids out of things like foster homes and stuff like that. And in fact, I think Fauci did that. If you read The Real Anthony Fauci by Bobby Kennedy, his clinical trials of drugs, one of phase 1 NIH clinical trials, you basically give the drug to someone to see if it's toxic. I might be on the wrong phase, but you test toxicity in the behavior of the drug. And it turns out that they were using inner city foster kids. That's not informed consent, period. You got some kid who's being taken care of in theory by some person, probably a single mom, who's doing it because she gets $500 a month from the federal government to do it. She probably could, in many cases, couldn't give less of a damn about the kid, but wants the check, right? I don't think this is an outlandish extrapolation to say that this is how you would get an inner city foster kid. And they estimate 13,000 inner city foster kids were used in Fauci-sponsored clinical trials. And the kids would realize they're being made sick and they'd try to refuse the drugs. They'd jam them down their throat forcibly with feeding tubes and shit like that. This is why you should read Kennedy's book. You get 100 pages in and you want to go get a rope. You really can't get 5 chapters into Kennedy's book without wanting to go find Fauci and deal with him. It's just a horror story. And it's compelling. And he's never been sued. They've never refuted what he said. No pushback. They just ignored the book. There's something like 30,000 reviews on Amazon. No pushback. So Fauci, bad guy. I was on a Zoom call with Scott Ellis, and I asked him whether Fauci was. So Ellis sat with Fauci and Birx for 6 months in the Oval Office during the beginning of the COVID story. And I asked Atlas, I said, what was the evidence Fauci, what he was doing was nefarious? And he kind of waved that one off. He said, what you cannot fathom is how stupid those two were. He says, they were unimaginably stupid. This, by the way, Zoom call's online. This thing got recorded. And he said, Fauci never once made a scientific argument. He said, Birx would come in with crap she dragged off the internet and make pie charts and have no idea what it meant, whether the data was worth a damn or anything. She would just put up pie charts week after week. And then one day, Fauci brings in a paper which struck Alice as bizarre because he never seemed to know about the science of what he was talking about. And Alice says he had read the paper, so he knew what the topic was. And Fauci goes to say the word encephalomyelitis, which to a guy working at the 7-Eleven might be a tough pronunciation, but to a guy who has a degree in medicine, encephalomyelitis is not a tough one to get off the tongue. And he said, Alice said he butchered it so badly that it was unrecognizable. And that Alice said, I asked him to repeat it, and he would not. And so this is who ran the global response to COVID. So the trafficking story is a story I want to keep. Now, I'm reading about it. It's so dark, I'm not convinced I should publish it. It's dangerous territory. The danger for me is not that I'm going to call someone out and they're going to kill me, but rather I'm going to get something wrong and they're going to sue me. And I did a podcast with Nick Bryant, who wrote the definitive treatise on the Franklin scandal, which was a pedophile network that got unraveled. And I asked him about stuff like that, and he said, you just can't get it wrong. He says, you have to get your facts right. And so the alternative way to do it is to say, look, here is what they are saying, and be conservative. What I'll tell you is, for example, the guys who hunt pedophiles, there's people they go after all day long. There's popular topics. Like they go after Tom Hanks. They go after Oprah Winfrey. They go after Ellen DeGeneres. What you can't tell is if what they're basing these attacks on, whether the foundation of the data is strong. And I've dug into some of them to try to strengthen the foundation. And I got to admit, I understand where they're coming from. But I can make up an alternative narrative that leaves you just uneasy enough where you go, boy, I would not call that person a pedophile. But I can tell the case that others are making and quote people and stuff like that. And so I'm going to write it to get it off my back. It's been stuck to me. It's been camped out in my head for about 3 years now. And I'm going to write it. And it's way darker than Epstein. Although Epstein probably has stuff way darker than Epstein too. Because it's really about, and I've run into some trafficking websites where you go, oh shit, I shouldn't be here. And so I sent an email to a couple of friends and said, just for the record, this morning at 9:30, I hit a website on child trafficking. I just want to be on record in case at some point, I'm not trying to hide it. And then I actually, it was a Yandex site. Yandex is Russia's Google. And it was clear, these were just mugshots of children. Just mugshots of children. And at one point I said, I got to get a screen grab. Someone else had gotten one. But I said, I got to get one. I've already been there. Go back, get the screen grab. And I went back and everything had been scrubbed, which is garbage. But I had the screen grab someone else got, and it was just what I saw. I mean, it was like, so I'm comfortable with their screen grab. But this is happening by the millions. And no matter how many newscasters talk about child trafficking, they all say it now. They never say, where the hell are these kids going? And we know, for example, that NGOs funded by the U.S. government were taking possession of the kids and moving them around. Why are these people not being convicted and executed? And the answer is because it's actually too big of a story. It's too big. And so it's never going to, it's about as likely to come out as the details of Epstein. It's not going to come out. But I've been chasing it to try to piece it together. You always end up 80% of the way, and then you have to extrapolate. You have to say, okay, there's a bit of a leap of faith here. But I've got, I did a Zoom call with Carlo Bogano, number 3 at the Vatican. And he was calling it out. He was referring to pedophilia being the currency of geopolitics and stuff. He was laying it out. And Carlo's the guy who called out the Vatican for hiding all the pedophilia in the church, which I found to be not that interesting, because I go, okay, so if you got to take a vow of abstinence and to join the church and stuff, I go, you're probably going to get some messy situations out of that, right? You're probably better off letting these guys on cork occasionally, and you don't. And so hiding that doesn't strike me as that interesting. It's important, but it's not something that mystifies me. And but he started digging into other stuff. And he called out Obama for being married to a dude. He called out Macron's wife for being a guy. I mean, he really went at a lot of stuff. And they excommunicated him. And I've got former Secretary of the UN, I think it was, talking about how bad trafficking is and how much it's. I was on a Zoom call with Andrew Bridgen. Look up Andrew Bridgen. He's an MP in Great Britain. And he says he's got all the dirt on all the pedophiles inside the government. He went to MI5, he went to MI6, he gave it to the authorities, said crickets, nothing. I tried to get him to give up names. And for reasons that are probably pretty obvious, he wouldn't. I think he doesn't want to get capped. But he's willing to state that it's everywhere. It is everywhere. I gave a talk on this on a Zoom call. I gotta give a talk on this to a group of friends. This Zoom group I'm in is where a lot of these things came through. And I gave a 2.5-hour talk on progress I've made on this story. Very informal, unprofessional. And about 2 hours in, a CIA guy showed up. I go, what? And it turns out the guy who runs the group says, oh, I've known him for 25 years. And he ended up saying, you're not going to stop it because about 20% of the CIA is involved in trafficking. So it's not going to go away. That's the story I want people to realize they've underestimated it. And if you accept the million number and you realize you can't name a single person who's been sent to prison, and if you've really been following this shit, I can name people who've been sent to prison. But it's in the 2 dozen category. I guarantee you those 1 or 2 dozen are not consuming 1 million kids a year. And consuming is the word. And if you really want to read bad shit, read about Anthony Weiner's laptop. Sidney Powell said, if that laptop ever were made public, 98% of the political system would collapse. Because Anthony Weiner had kill switch videos. And apparently 9 detectives went through the laptop. Those 9 detectives who were not named people, they have names, are all dead. There is no number 10 saying, oh, let me see the laptop, right? No one wants to see the laptop. It's bad for your health. The FBI has it. Kash Patel will have access to it if he wants it. I don't think there's any chance he's going to be transparent because I think the FBI is so dirty at this point. It's where, have you been reading about Comey's daughter and all the cases she's involved in? So James Comey, who I think is, you read about James Comey, it turns out the guy's got Marxist roots. He's a real problem child. His daughter, at the ripe old age of like 29, coming out of law school, was on one of Epstein's early cases, has been on every big case that involved covering up shit. I just read an article, took notes on. It's a Zero Hedge article, actually. It's on Zero Hedge today. And I'd heard the story, but Zero Hedge put it together nicely. And she's on all these big cases where important stuff goes to die. The FBI is where data goes to die. So it's the kind of Praetorian Guard. It's kind of a Praetorian Guard, right? And so we got to live with this now. The question, it's sort of like I like ribeye and I like prime rib. Should I go visit a slaughterhouse? And the answer is no. Right? I should probably stay away from the slaughterhouse if I want to keep eating ribeye.
Well, you mentioned something, and I know one of your it was one of your year in reviews. I was looking at it, and it was of course talking about the Boeing whistleblowers and such.
Right.
And
who died?
He said, hey, if anything happens to me, or excuse me, I'm not going to kill myself. It's it's somebody else.
And then he did.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's just so spooky. And I was part of a think tank in Newport Beach, and we had someone who was part of I think it was called the New California Movement or something of that sort. And one of the main individuals who's behind that movement mentioned about people getting killed by the Clintons, and I just thought that seems kind of crazy. I mean, really?
There's 100 of them. Well, there's 100 of them. The Clinton kill list is an impressive list. Now, I don't think Bill is killing them. I don't think Hillary is, but I think it's like the Gambino hit list, right? So Carlo Gambino might not be the guy who hit him, but there's probably 100 guys. So I think the Clinton family is a crime family in the pure sense of the word. And in fact, it haunts me a little bit. Here's something I wouldn't have thought twice about besides just finding it curious. Does it seem odd to you that there's a picture of Bill Clinton in high school meeting JFK? Seems awfully coincidental all of a sudden. I'm going, wait a minute. Clinton met JFK. Was Clinton groomed, right? Where did Clinton come from? There's pictures of Bob Mueller and John Kerry in prep school together. What are the odds, right? John Kerry, when he gave his speeches to Congress as a veteran, talking about atrocities, you're sitting going, okay, here's this Vietnam veteran wearing his fatigues, giving speeches about atrocities in Vietnam. And then you look up and he's presidential candidate material, and I go, oh, what are the odds, right? And then you find out that some Russian spy, some ex-KGB guy said, we used to plant dog shit stories all the time about stuff like that and feed it. And he said, if you listen to Kerry's speech about atrocities he witnessed, he says, he didn't witness any of those. That was shit we made up. That was exactly the shit we were making up and feeding into the system, and Kerry was just lip syncing it. So here's one for you. A guy named Janda, Dr. Janda. He was undersecretary of something under the Bush administration. He was an orthopedic surgeon, obviously a prominent guy. And he's being interviewed. I saw this about a year ago. I save him. I save everything. So if anyone wants this, send me an email. I'll send you the video. And he says he goes out to lunch. And I like these anecdotes because they're like Whitney Webb puzzle pieces, where you go, that piece right there is screaming at me, even though it's just one puzzle piece. So Janet, in this video, talks about how he went to lunch with this guy on his first week in the Beltway. The guy says, no matter what you do, do not go to a private party, period. He says, even if it's the vice president's house, don't go. And Janda says, why? And he says, because you will wake up in the morning in a total fog and clipped to your shirt will be a Polaroid picture of you and a 5-year-old. And then I realized how horrible it was. I've been working on the theory that they don't corrupt powerful people. They corrupt people and then give them power. They won't give you the power until you're corrupted. That's Hollywood, by the way. You don't get good parts unless you're corrupted. And I realized that, okay, so they corrupt you first, and then they give you power because they need to know they have control of you. Then there's one victim of child trafficking. Now, this could be fake. It could be completely fake, but the victim is talking about being trafficked. And she describes a scenario where she says, I've never seen a grown man so broken by this. And she said she was there. There's some kids. There's like a 5-year-old kid. And this senator is being told, you have sex with a 5-year-old, or we're going to kill these kids. And so he does it. And she's telling this story. Now, if you watch victims of trafficking, the ones who spent a long time in the network, I don't know how generally true it is, but there's a certain personality trait that you can kind of pick up on after a while. And what you pick up is a flatness of their personality. And part of it's because their personalities have been so sort of ripped to shreds and compartmentalized and multiple personalities. And apparently this is chicken shit, easy to do now. But they have this flat personality as though it's the ultimate Teflon surface for them. And apparently they have different personalities that deal with different things, like when they're being raped, when they're being beaten, when they have these different beings within their head. And it's called dissociative something behavior. Again, I've got it all written down. And she's talking, and what you notice is there's this kind of flatness in the personality of at least some of them. And I watched one guy get interviewed, and I go, I can see it right there. The guy's just emotionless. You watch Annika Lucas, who's a famous victim, and she'll talk about horrid things without showing a shred of emotion. And so this woman gets pressed for who is the senator. Now, again, could be fake, could be created by Mossad, could be created by the KGB, who knows? But she says Bernie Sanders. Now, Bernie Sanders arguably was facing this absolutely Sophie's choice, unwinnable situation. And you realize you don't have to corrupt powerful people. You don't even have to corrupt them. The Janda story was all you have to do is drug them. I saw a movie with this in it where they drugged a guy and then they did a bunch of shit and then they released him and they owned him. Let's say they did that to you. Would you be willing to go out and say, they've got videos of me and I got drugged, right? Or would you say, okay, my life just changed. There's nothing I can do now. And by the way, if they say, by the way, now we're going to give you wealth and power, we're going to get you elected to Congress, we're going to put you in positions of authority. I'm working on a theme right now that I think is actually pretty good, and I'm not alone, that Kamala Harris may have been an MK Ultra victim. She may be a Manchurian candidate. And the case is actually pretty good. It's not airtight, but I'm not alone. It's a very smart people are also chasing it. But does it hit the light of day? No, not at all. But I'm going to write about it. She's going to be a subsection in this write-up. And I'll tell you, one of the women who says she's got all the traits was former head of Time Magazine's European division. This is not a lightweight. She studied it because her mother was a victim. And I'm rambling here, but this topic is so in my skull that I got to write it to get it out. It is camped out for free in my head, as they say, and I've got to write it. I've got to sort of purge it out. And then the first thing I'll do is send it to my brother. And then I won't send it to my wife, period. No chance. And I will send it to people I truly trust. And if I do release it to the public, I might release it behind a paywall, because once it's at zero hedge, it's out there. And if some guy says, hey, take this down, can't be done. Right? And so I've talked to a bunch of super high-level techies and asked, can you anonymously publish something? truly, anonymously? And I think the answer is no, because I think, for example, AI would be smart enough to be able to take something I wrote and read it and say, that's Collum. Because you've read my year in review, right? Stylistically, it's not exactly normal. And so that's the story that people are missing, underestimating. And it's huge. And the reason I chased it down is because I kept seeing things that politicians were doing that made no sense. Why would you open the southern border completely? Why? Why would Biden open the southern border? You go, Democratic voters, I go, that's stupid. You just get Smartmatic to rig the election. That's just dumb. And they're not supposed to vote. They're just money. Money never explains anything to me. The guys doing the bad shit don't need money. It's power, it's ego, it's something, but there's some gravitational force out there in the universe that's drawing people to do things that make no sense. Like I'm saying, what is the glue that's binding these stories together? And I said, maybe it's these pedophilia networks. And here's what happens when you dig into them. Within a heartbeat, you run into Satanism and shit like that, and you go, oh, Jesus Christ, I didn't need that. But the Venn diagram of trafficking and Satanism looks like that. I mean, you hit Satanism very, very fast. And the overlap is huge. As in, you could not write about trafficking and not talk about Satanism. And I was reading about this shit. I'm kind of purging here, aren't I? If you had asked me a year ago who's the most famous Satanist in the world, unambiguously, without hesitation, I would have said Marina Abramovic. Now, Google Marina Abramovic just for fun while I'm talking. Marina Abramovic is an overt Satanist. She was written up in like Atlantic Monthly or something. And you go to images and you'll find pictures of her having dinner parties with cadavers out in the middle of the table, which they say are fake. I hope. I'm not sure that's always true. You'll see pictures of her holding a goat's head. Can you share? Do you have share abilities in this? I mean, this will stagger.
Let me see here. Oh gosh, let me see here. Let's see. Share screen. Let's see.
Yeah. So boot them. Do the Google.
What to share with Riverside FM? Okay. Entire screen slap tab. Oh, I wonder if I can give it to you. I haven't tinkered with this before. Let me see. Let's see. Oh, you know, it might be on your own browser. You need screen sharing from your browser. Okay. You might actually have it on your side. Let me see here. Real quick here. Let's see. I'm going to see what I can do here. Just check in. Okay. Here we go. Okay. Screen. Oh, I see. Okay.
Your viewers can just do it themselves. Search Marina.
Yeah.
You got it.
My screen. So, well, I'm.
But now we've got the infinite thing going. I've seen this before. There we go. Right. That was it. There you go. That'll do it. You got it.
Okay.
Yeah, now search Marina.
Okay.
Marina. Marina. Then Abramovic is Abramovic.
Here we go.
Now, throw in the word Satan on top of that just to get past some of the debris. Now go to images. Look at that goat thing right there, about fifth from the right. She's not a Satanist. Right. Now go down 2 rows right below it.
On this side?
Right underneath that one. Right under, that one. Yeah, click on that. No. Well, there's one. Kind of go one lower. Go one more. There we go. There she is sitting on entrails, right? The picture of her. Yeah, Marina Abramovic just watched conspiracy theorists will let her go. I said, sorry, sitting there on entrails is not the way to achieve that. So I'm reading about Marina Abramovic going, Dave, you're too deep. This is just nuttier than shit, right? That's her painting on the wall in blood. That's written in blood, by the way, that shit. Search spirit cooking. Search spirit cooking.
Okay.
Spirit cooking. Images. Okay, looking at this. Oh, look at go 4 over and then down 2.
So 4 over down.
No, lower. No, down 2, left, up, right. Now 1 to the right. Click on that puppy. That's a dinner party. Well, we don't click on it because then you get this crap. Just show the image. Just
okay. I know.
Go back.
Oh, okay.
Spirit cooking is where you pretend to eat cadavers. Look at that shit on the lower right. See that group, that cluster?
Oh yeah.
Those are cadaver dining parties. But so she's a Satanist.
Oh my gosh. This is
Right? You ever seen shit like this? If I went to this dinner party, I'd be heading out the door as fast as my feet could move. And so there's pictures of her with like Jay-Z and Lady Gaga and famous people. So now here's the problem. I'm thinking you're just too deep. This is nutty shit. So above the fold headline, she gets appointed by Zelensky to run the Ukrainian school system.
oh my gosh.
Nothing like hiring a Satanist. There she is. Yeah, there's Lady Gaga up there. You can't click on the link or it just becomes nonsense.
Oh my gosh. I gotta look this. Let's see.
But the upper right, that's Lady Gaga up there.
To be an ambassador to Ukraine, help the children affected by rebuilding schools. Yeah. Wow. It looks like something else, but
Right? Would you put a Satanist in charge of your country's school system? I don't think so.
There you go. Yep. Climate change, virtual reality to the war in Ukraine. Well, I think it's like what I heard from another person. I think if people were to really be aware of the true nature of this reality, it'd probably make their skin crawl. There'd be
so the Clinton crime family, the kill list is, I think, actually depends on which one you look at, but the number's around 60. And one of the lists was really good because it described each case and why it's on the kill list. And by the way, JFK is on the kill list. JFK Jr. is on the kill list. And you go, well, how is JFK Jr. on the Clinton kill list? Well, it turns out first of all, there's people who say that the plane crashed as much as they said he boned it. Pilots say, no, that's a stupid argument. I don't know what to believe. But here's the deal. People close to JFK Jr. said he was about to announce a run for the New York State Senate. But that seat, when he died, got taken by Hillary Clinton. So you say, okay, doesn't mean she killed him, but it took it off the 0% probability list fast. And so then you got Vince Foster and you got all these guys and some guy was supposed to testify against the Clinton Foundation and end up washing up on the beach in Miami and stuff like that. There's just so many of them.
So how do you? I'm trying to speculate. So is it like some black ops, if that's the right word, some group that's their funding is not reported to Congress or anything, and it could be a simple, hey, we got a problem here, so I need you to deal with this person. So kind of plausible deniability, and then
I don't know.
Yeah.
What I do know is if you control many people in Congress, you control Congress. Because if you got a friend who says, look, dude, if you don't vote for this bill, they're going to do shit to me that I don't even want to describe for you. Sidney Powell, the famous Trump lawyer, who, forget about whether you hate Trump, she was a prominent lawyer. She's the one who said that the Wiener laptop would collapse the government if it got out.
Wow.
There's video. Search Sidney Powell Wiener laptop. Sidney Powell Wiener laptop.
Oh, Sydney. Okay, hold on. Okay. Oh, am I spelling that wrong? Sidney Powell.
Oh, you can go to video even then.
This video?
I don't know. I can't see it. It's too small.
Oh, so that's her.
Go to the video choices. Go up to take Google up and hit videos instead of.
Okay. Oh yeah.
The one about 5 down is probably her talking about. No, that's not it either. Sydney, that one right there. That one right there. Yeah, that one right there. Can you play audio?
Yeah. Let's see. I should be able to.
You got to hit it's on mute. It's on mute.
Uh-oh.
The cursor. No. Bring the cursor over to the far left of the video. See, go underneath the red dot. Yeah, right there. Hit that.
Yeah. I'm just, it kind of froze on me, the screen there. Maybe that's.
Yeah, what a shock.
Can you hear it or no?
No.
Oh, shit.
That doesn't matter. That's just a French subtitle.
Okay. Let me see if I can help you with the audio. Let's see here. Oh, all these tabs I haven't done this before with this. I'm in new territory. Trying to
so the people listening know what to do. Sidney Powell Wiener laptop. They can find a video of Sidney Powell saying, if you could get to the Wiener laptop, just unbelievably bad things would happen.
Oh my gosh.
So once you get past a couple of the walls where you go, oh my God, and then you start looking into Pizzagate.
Mm-hmm.
And you start running into the WikiLeaks emails in which they're talking about pizza in a way that just doesn't make sense unless you happen to know the pedophile world and you happen to know that pizza is a symbol for pedophilia and the different toppings have different meanings, and there's a whole language that circles around pizza. And the Wiener, the emails that came from WikiLeaks, which is why I think they chased Julian Assange. I wouldn't be shocked if it was the pizza crap that got him chased. He released a bunch of emails from Podesta and these guys, or the other thing you can do is search Tony Podesta art collection. He's John Podesta's brother. He's a lobbyist, and you search Tony Podesta art collection. He's a famous guy, so it's not like this is just some obscure person. Tony Podesta art collection. And you have to dig, so go to images now. Yeah. So now, okay, so now you got to listen to me. Okay, go to the upper left. Let's start with the upper left.
Okay.
Upper left, all the way over, upper left.
Right here? Yep.
Click on that. That's tame. Let's start with that. Now, go down 2 rows, not 1 row, 2 rows. Move your cursor.
Oh, do you want to go down?
Down another, there, and go across 2 images. Click on that, 2 images. There we go. Click on that one. That's a pretty weird image. Now go 2 more images across.
Okay, over here?
There we go. Yeah. That's pretty weird stuff. Right?
Yeah.
Look at now, go to the far right. There we go. Go to the far right, row 3. Far right, row 3. Nope. Yeah. Someone explain why Tony Podesta would have that in his house. Now there's a fun one. Start scrolling down with your cursor, so when I see it, I'll know it, because there's a funny story on one of these. Keep going. Just keep scrolling down. You're looking for a picture of a kid in a swimming pool, an empty swimming pool. Oh, right there. See that? Right at the top middle. Top middle. See that kid? Click on that image. Yeah. Click on that. Have you clicked? Because it'll show up on the right if you click on it.
Okay. Oh.
No.
Yep. Which one? These images. Yep. Is this what you're referencing?
Well, so the kid, there's one kid. So that swimming pool. See, it's a swimming pool. Yeah, that guy.
Yes. Yeah.
That swimming pool has been traced to the basement of the Vanderbilt mansion. The speculation is, this is pure speculation. Do you know the most famous Vanderbilt right now?
Who is that?
Grandson, Anderson Cooper.
Oh, that's right.
The pedo hunters say that's Anderson Cooper. The pedo hunters say that's Anderson Cooper. Now, the strangest thing about this pedophile network theme is the unimaginable reality that families shove their own kids into the network. Not imaginable to a normal person. But that this satanic shit is a religion, and it goes back generations. And I did a podcast with a guy who knew a lot about this shit, and he said it's the fastest growing religion in the world right now, Satanism. You say, what's with all the kid shit? And the answer is that if you're a Satanist, you want to hurt God, would be one way to put it. And they say the closest thing to God are children. And that's why there's the emphasis on hurting children. Now, this podcast of yours has gotten so deep into the twisted world, but again, it's one of these things. What I want people to do is back out and say, okay, that overloaded my neural capacity. Mm-hmm. But there's 1 million kids a year disappearing, and until you can explain where they go, you are stuck with the reality to say there's no, there's organ harvesting. Unfortunately, what they say is the kids get used up and then get harvested. See the pizza? Look at that. Go down to the third row on the left. There we go. Yeah, there's the pizza. There's more pizza over to the right. Pizza is a huge imagery in this world. And the different toppings have different meanings. And you can find perverted artwork with pizza in it. So you can find the intersection of the two worlds. Mm-hmm. And there, you notice John Podesta's there, and there's Tony to his left. They're just... That you got to by searching Tony Podesta art collection. He's a famous guy, well-known lobbyist. That's what you get when you search Tony Podesta art collection. And there's John Podesta with John Kerry.
Oh my gosh. There's Trudeau.
Oh yeah, I know. And then what you start finding is the Satanism crosses with the Freemasons. And if you go back historically, what happens is you get deeper and deeper into the past, which makes it less and less relevant to most people because you go, look, I don't care about some previous century where they were living in barbarism. So I have not dug into the history because I figure that just moved me further and further away from a even remotely believable story. Mm-hmm. But these are such strange, and these are known artists, by the way. A lot of these paintings are signed art. They're people who paint this shit. Right there, what a strange. Now, you want to see really weird? You search London 2012 Olympics. Search, put in the word demon after the Olympics. Put in the word demon. Where are you? I can never figure out why you're not up in the demon. There we go.
London 2012 Olympics,
well,
demon.
Yeah. Look at that first structure, upper left. The London Olympics had a satanic theme, and if you find the right video, it's amazing. There's kids all over the infield in their pajamas, in bed, being terrorized by demons, by multiple demons running through the infield. That big demon in the middle. Why would you have that in an Olympic ceremony? And if you search for videos, there's some amazing ones you go, like, and those are the nurses. And the claim is that, but the kids are in their pajamas, in bed, terrorized by demons. And the nurses have this sort of odd robotic-like choreography.
Boy, this is just a reminder of how little I and I guess the rest of the world is as it relates to
right.
This. I mean, that's like
and
this is weird, yeah.
And what do I benefit by chasing this? I just, part of the problem is that if this is correct, then you have no prayer of understanding the world unless you go here, and it's not obvious you want to go here. So if you want to understand why we're bombing some country or why some guy got assassinated or whatever, you can't possibly understand it if this is the kind of shit lurking right beneath the surface.
Wow, that's all. That's pretty mind-boggling.
Right, I've ruined your day.
Yeah, wow.
You might not want to post this. I mean, this is just too far gone.
Oh my gosh.
But I'm happy to have helped you. But if you want to cut it off and just say, Dave and I got so dark, we've left it unpublished. You will not offend me.
Well, I wanted to ask you, and then I guess we'll kind of wrap up and such. As it relates to things of this nature, one topic that's of great intrigue to me and would love to hear your thoughts is on the new term people use is the UAP phenomena. Do you care to share kind of your
UAP? Fill me in on that.
Oh no, gosh, now I'm blanking up. Like unidentified craft, things of that nature.
Oh, I think that's all bullshit.
Okay.
I think that's a cover story for various Defense Department, whatever, or it's designed to traumatize us and keep us. By the way, so the day that they released the Epstein files, it was a big bust. Gene Hackman and his wife were reported dead. There's always something to talk about instead of whatever. Like when Trump was talking about taking over Greenland and Canada and Mexico and whatever, you go, why would he do this? You go, well, just ask, what are we not talking about? Whatever it is we're not talking about is why he has us talking about that crap. And so I had a colleague decades ago say to me, have you ever noticed nothing bad happens on the weekend? So all the bad stuff occurs Monday to Friday, and then we talk about it on the weekend. This is when the news, yeah. And so while Trump was doing all these things that were causing the left to go nuts, he was getting all his appointments confirmed. Now, who's that provide cover for? It actually provides cover for the left. if the left is going, shit, we can't stop any of this shit, then you don't want it headlining either. And so both sides might say, yeah, let's these appointments are going to get grisly. No one wants us to go across the news. And now I watched Fox News. I've been watching Fox News lately, and it's getting tiring again. But they spent a ton of time on Gene Hackman last night. And I get why it's kind of an entertaining story, because they found him and his wife and his dog dead with the front door open, and they'd been there for a month or something. And you go, there is something. It's sort of like the attempted assassinations. There's things all wrong with the story. And then the question is, why are we getting this shit? What is it we're not being told? I'm convinced that it's a magician, right? I watched a friend of mine was a good magician, and one of the things he did was just hysterical. Was he'd put a person on stage, he'd sit him in a chair, and he'd do something with tissue paper, and he'd flip it back and forth. Meanwhile, he would throw it over the person's shoulder, and the audience could see it sailing over the guy's shoulder. And then he'd put his hands out like this and say, pick a hand. And the guy pick, he'd go, nope. And then he'd go back, he'd get another. And he just kept throwing it over the guy's shoulder. And the audience could see the skit, could see how he was faking the guy out. But the guy was duped, right? And so the question is, are we just being duped? Are we being fed news? Is Pam Bondi's Epstein fiasco covering something more important, hiding something more important? And someone said today, like Zelensky and Trump and Vance went at it in the Oval Office. It seemed unpleasant. I'm going, ex-dictators, dictators who were former allies of the United States have life expectancies that are very short. So Zelensky really is trying to stay alive. But someone pointed out something. He said, look, these are two actors acting with each other. I go, what if, it just clicked. I go, what if that whole thing was just professional wrestling, kayfabe? And that Trump did what he had to do, and Zelensky did what he had to do, and it's all part of some shtick. And a lot of people don't want to give Trump credit for being that good, but I go, I'll tell you, he pulled off more stunts during his campaign and stuff that were very clever. So the people who really are most shocked are the ones who underestimated his intellectual firepower, his ability. There was one of the women on the Shark Tank where they make deals with the guys who bring ideas forward, and they decide to invest. I'm with Mark Cuban, and there's a guy I could live without. She said, I have never seen a negotiator as talented as Trump. She said, he has the ability to find your weakness instinctively and then hit it. And the left always viewed Trump as this bumbling fool. I'm going, you underestimated him the whole way. I had a colleague talk in 2016 when he had just gotten the Republican nomination. She talked about his incompetent campaign. I said, he just knocked off a dozen opponents. What's incompetent? I said, I'll give you unorthodox, but he nailed them. And then he beat Hillary. Nothing incompetent there. You can't even rule out the possibility that for months, the inner sanctum of politics knew that Trump was going to be president. That the whole Biden-Harris thing was just bullshit. It was all just professional wrestling. I can't rule out the possibility that Trump's just playing a role. I'm hoping not.
my gosh. Yeah, this is
This is mind bending.
yeah, this wow.
Well, so how do you steelman these things? This is the problem. So how do you refute a theory like this? That is the challenge. What am I looking for? Well, I've been looking for moments like when Bondi said this is going to be an unbelievable release of Epstein shit, and then it was nothing. And I go, you said you had it on your desk. You can't possibly not have known what was in that file. And then you release it, and then the shit hits the fan, and then you say, oh, the FBI cheated me. I go, you had the file on your desk, and you said it was awful stuff, and then you gave us nothing. So now we're screaming about that. What's going on that we're not screaming about?
Wow. That's deep.
It's very deep. And then the question, a guy like me who likes to try to understand what's going on, you end up in sort of a futility. Yeah, I'm at layer 12 of the onion, and the truth is either layer 47 or there is no one truth.
I guess how does this, I don't know if anyone's asked you about your religious preferences, but I guess how does that all tie in to you?
I'll tell you how it ties in. First and foremost, I wrote about religion probably 10 years ago, where I wrote in defense of religion, even though I kind of grew up what I would have called an atheist. But then when I started reading about the Middle Ages, I realized that the church was an organizing principle, that I'd underestimated its importance. In a world lit only by fire, which is the name of a book that's a really good book, the church brought some semblance of order. And they actually would bully the elites into behaving themselves by saying, look, this is what hell looks like. Do you really want to go there? Right? And so I became more agnostic, but agnostic's not the right word either. So I don't know. So I support and I benefit from religion, but I don't want to practice it. What do you call that person? I don't know. What I have noticed is there's a lot of people who have been through the last 5 years, a lot of COVID battlers, where they said, oh, this story's wrong, completely wrong. And like Naomi Wolf's a textbook case of this, where she went from being a limousine liberal, cocktail party liberal, brain dead liberal, to married to a special ops guy going to the gun range and growing her own food and stuff. Just a complete life change. And she also talks about things in terms of good versus evil. So I know of a lot of people who have gone from what sound like just geopolitical kind of stances to describing the world as a battle of good versus evil, which is implicitly religious, even if they don't say I'm religious. When you start talking good versus evil, it really has this sort of otherworldly feel to it. It's not just saying good guys versus bad guys. You're saying good versus evil, like good and evil are themselves entities. And I don't think I'm ever going to cross the line and become religious, but I'm noticing that society is kind of, there could be a resurgence of religion in the future. It could make a comeback. It had been pushed onto the back burner. Someone said climate change is a religion for people who think they're too smart to be religious. Right? Things like that. So I think by pushing religion out, we've brought in other topics to be fanatical about. And so you get the people who sit and block traffic during rush hour by sitting in the street, what I call biodegradable speed bumps. They're religious. They might not think of it as a religion, but that is a cult. That's Jonestown. Maybe you didn't drink Fatal Kool-Aid, but that's a cult. That's Ruby Ridge, whatever that is. That's you've got your own cult. And I was listening to a guy did an interview with Rogan who talks about this kind of brainwashing stuff. I can't remember. His name is Hughes. I'm not done yet. But he talks about how you kind of hypnotize people and get them, how you recruit, how you sell someone a used car, all the games you play. So I a number of years ago, I concluded that if you want to understand geopolitics, you have to start reading books about authoritarianism. You have to start reading books about propaganda. So I read Edward Bernays' 1926 or 28 treatment called Propaganda, Matthias Dedmitz's the Psychology of Totalitarianism, Hannah Arendt's book, which is a bitch of a read. It's a very tough read. My colleague who won a Nobel Prize in chemistry and spent 2 years in an attic in Germany, one of the real smart guys said Hannah Arendt's a tough read, so I didn't feel so bad after that. And you realize we think we have news and Russia has propaganda. It's like, dude, our propaganda machine, which, by the way, you hear about CNN doing badly and how they're losing revenue. CNN doesn't care about revenue. The CIA black budget could cover CNN's revenue times 1,000. CNN needs viewers because propaganda doesn't work if no one's listening. They don't need the money. It's not about the money. That whole thing can be funded with USAID money. Maybe not this year, but you know what I mean. The Pentagon supposedly has lost $14 trillion. Well, guess what? That pays for CBS, NBC, and ABC, and MSNBC, and Fox, and you name it, till eternity. They need us to keep watching the news because they need us to keep shaping. And then, of course, you always need the limited hangout. You need the person who you think is on your team. Rush Limbaugh, I don't know. Mike Gallagher now, Tucker Carlson, who seems authentic. But I don't know. They've studied, Jordan Peterson talks about this, they've studied rats and social animals, and you can watch it in dogs when they play. The dominant dog could win every time, but doesn't, because the others won't play with it if it does. So they learn how to let each other win. If you watch my 4 dogs feed, they rotate in their bowls. I put bowls out. Each one knows where their bowl goes, but you turn your back on them and they've switched bowls. And it's like they're sharing a kill. And so we need to win often enough where we feel like we're in the game. Now, I mentioned Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson got his so the MK Ultra program, the brainwashing program, is up near McGill University, and it's tied intimately to McGill University. So McGill had a very serious CIA sponsored program for many years, and there's an asylum near there, and where they did a bunch of bad stuff. Jordan Peterson got his PhD from McGill. His advisor was an MK Ultra tied professor, his PhD advisor. You go, well, what does that tell you? Well, here's the interesting thing. Anyone who's a Jordan Peterson follower will notice a couple things. First of all, he's got a lot of wisdom, and he thinks deeply, and he's a very sharp guy. But he looks tormented. I've seen him cry a bunch of times. I got to tell you, the last time I was talking, I'm talking to you about shit today, and I'm not on the cusp of crying. And then I found myself saying that Jordan Peterson, was he somehow a product of something? By the way, Kamala Harris, I mentioned her as a Manchurian candidate. Her mother had a position in McGill. It just, All roads lead back to McGill. All roads lead back to Jolly West, who's a famous MK Ultra guy. Read the book Chaos by Charles Manson. You'll learn all about all the CIA products that were put out, which include Jack Ruby, Timothy McVeigh, Ted Kaczynski, Charles Manson, legendary. I think most, if not all, the shootings in the United States, these unexplainable shootings, I think most of them are are drug-addled teenagers who've been commandeered and groomed and then released to go do something bad.
Wow.
And you say, well, why would they do that? And I go, well, it's kind of a laboratory experiment, right? You can't use lab rats to test whether your brainwashing works. You gotta actually do it. So you get some kid to see if you can get him to go shoot up a school. Worked. I thought Ted Kaczynski was a failure of MK Ultra. I didn't even believe MK Ultra until a couple of years ago, but it was in plain sight. And I thought Kaczynski was an MK Ultra program gone bad. I'm not sure it went bad. I'm not sure it wasn't the experiment. I think Son of Sam might have been. Oh, here's a funny one. I was watching a video the other day recommended to me by the veterans, the Bitcoin veterans that I did a podcast with. They mentioned this thing called the rich man play tricks video. Now, Woody Harrelson, his father had done, was in prison for life and then ended up dying mysteriously. And I once saw Woody Harrelson get interviewed. And they asked him some question, which his cryptic answer said he was CIA. And I remember thinking, oh, Woody Harrelson's father wasn't just a murderer. He's way more complicated. And then I'm watching this video, and it turns out he was one of the supposedly 6 shooters at Dealey Plaza who took out Kennedy, his father. A famous CIA, FBI assassin. Known for this, not just that one. This Rich Men Tricks video is a disturbingly inverted view of the world. And it's 3.5 hours. You got to be, but it talks about the industrialists funding the Nazis and funding the Soviets and funding the, J.P. Morgan, richest guy. You find out that J.P. Morgan, his bank, he only owned like 15% of it. The rest was owned by other famous families. J.P. Morgan was just a pawn. And I'd heard that. And it turns out the claim is that we kind of picked up Adolf Hitler and said, okay, he's the right guy for this task, and so we're going to put him in power. And they funded the Germans. They funded everybody. They all got stinking rich. You really got to ask if the population, if COVID vaccine was a population control mechanism. The Deagle report? Deagle? You heard of the Deagle report? Deagle's a military website. This is what it's been known for, is military shit. And then at one point, someone notices that they had global population projections. And all of a sudden in 2025, we're getting close to the end of the year. It's moving on. Their prediction had the population cutting by about a factor of 10. Without explanation, just all of a sudden, United States population, 50 million, and people go, what is this? And there was no, there's a typo, no retraction, just sitting there. And then you go, geez, I wonder if they knew COVID was coming. It's just such or is it just some psyop to drive us bananas? I read about DEWs, these directed energy weapons. I was reading RAND reports from 40 years ago. These are declassified 40-year-old reports talking about the shit they could do to you from satellites with various microwave lasers, which are called masers, and how you have to get through the atmosphere. So the first laser punches a hole, and the second laser goes in and hits the target. And which frequency light gives you a broadly based destruction? Which one can, can sniper destruction? And I got to figure 40 years later, behind the paywall, the shit's got to be better. And the fires in Quebec from maybe 3 years ago. Remember those fires in Quebec? These fires in Quebec. And satellite imagery, you can see like 25 fires. But what doesn't make sense is they all start simultaneously. So it's not a plume followed by a new plume followed by a new plume. This doesn't follow a wind pattern. They just all of a sudden out of the blue, just these plumes show up. And then I put the satellite map, which you can't quite tell what you're looking at, next to a map of Quebec and got my bearings. It was a kind of a semicircular pattern, but it wasn't perfectly. It wasn't a perfect pattern. It was in the middle of nowhere, and it was about a 350-mile diameter pattern. So there were like 25 fires starting simultaneously in a circle with a diameter of 350 miles. And you can say, well, maybe you did it with cell phones, no signal. I'm sorry, right? You're not going to get signal up in northern Quebec. And so it looks to me like maybe some cell is going, pop, 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 The Maui fires were suspicious. That's what got me to read about it. There were aspects of the Maui fires that didn't make sense. Do you remember how many kids supposedly died in Maui? Do you remember that? That was the horror story, is that the kids all got sent home, and USA Today said they think there's 700, 800 kids still unaccounted for. And in Maui fires, when the kids are unaccounted for, they're dead, right? And then you go to Wikipedia now, and they say 90 people died, and there's not a mention of a kid. Not a mention of a kid. And I have screen grabs. USA predicting 750, 800 kids not accounted for. And I tell you, when there's a natural disaster like Palisades, and if your kid's not accounted for, you're looking at a 90% probability that kid is not with us anymore. And all of a sudden, that whole storyline just went away. So something's wrong no matter what. And I chased the shootings in Las Vegas. And that story is wrong from head to toe. There is nothing about the Las Vegas shootings that fits together. Nothing. And I was not alone on that. Tucker Carlson was on it. Even Laura Ingraham was jumping on it. The whole Vegas shooting had flaw after flaw after flaw. I don't think Stephen Paddock fired a single shot. Not a single shot. I think there were shooters all over the place. And there were just stories that just didn't make any sense. So I wrote about 20 pages on that. Then a documentary came out. And it was like an answer key for me. It's like, okay, I got that. Oh, I missed that. But then I go, but they missed this one. They didn't get this part. And so it was interesting. So I think that the Vegas shootings were some sort of psyop that went bad. The best theory I like, actually, but it's incomplete, is by John Cullen, who said he thinks the Saudis did it. Mohammed bin Salman was on the top floor of the Mandalay. And Cullen's theory is they were trying to flush Mohammed bin Salman out of the hotel and then cap him and missed him. You go, well, how? Well, they had helicopters. Well, from where? It turns out there was an army base where they were training 200 miles away. Cullen's got ADHD or something. There's something special about his brain. He's the guy who figured out the trajectory at the Trump assassination. He's the guy who did the trajectory analysis there. So you got to say, is John Cullen who he appears to be? That sort of thing. So these historically important events, it's almost impossible to find one that you can't find serious heaps of bullshit. And that's why I look at, October 7th in Israel and I go, I don't know what happened. What I do know is they're lying because their lips are moving.
Unbelievable. Much of the
Yeah, I
stuff that
fried your brain today, didn't I? I apologize.
yeah, I'm just taking it all in. Dave, how can people get in touch with you? And
I should probably not give that. I can be reached at Twitter at David B. Collum. That's about it. I write an annual review, which is my pinned tweet, and it's at peak prosperity, and then within a day it ends up over at zero hedge, which is when it gets out of the corral. Um, and then if you just search me on Rumble or YouTube, there's just all sorts of podcasts. But otherwise, I don't have a blog or anything. I write one blog a year. The year in review is about, you've seen it, it's about 250 pages long on average. It's a religious experience writing it. And every year I swear I'm not doing it again. I just say, I can't do this again. I just can't do it. And it's getting harder because I'm getting more and more uncomfortable with the factualness of the stories. So I try to write with that in mind.
well, Dave, I thoroughly enjoyed hearing what you had to say today, and I look forward to having you on sometime in the near future.
If I figure it out. So when you hang up, I want to ask you a couple things.
Absolutely.